The sound didn't wake me. I was already awake, coiled in the dark of my stone quarters, a cold spike driven through my soul. The vampire's curse, Valerius's final hateful gift, was a living thing inside me, a splinter of ice under the skin of my spirit. When the alarm finally shrieked through Wolf's Peak, a piercing, soul-flaying howl that hadn't been heard in 300 years, the curse didn't flinch. It resonated. It hummed in tune with the Citadel's panic, a low thrum of ancient predatory satisfaction. In the flickering torchlight from the hall, I looked at my hands. For a single horrifying heartbeat, a web of black thread-thin veins pulsed beneath the skin, a map of the corruption I now carried. Then, they were gone. The alarm was still screaming when I met the rest of the ghost hunters in the main corridor. No one spoke. We didn't need to. We were already moving, our boots hammering on the granite floors, heading for the source. The sanctuary of balance. The most sacred, most heavily fortified chamber in our entire mountain fortress. The scene was a desecration. The 2-ton granite slabs that served as doors, each etched with glowing runes of warding and stasis, had been ripped from their adamantium hinges and tossed aside like cardboard. They lay shattered against the far wall, the ancient magic bleeding out of them in dying golden sparks. Inside, the air was cold, violated. At the center of the circular chamber, a pedestal of pure moon-kissed quartz stood empty. The light it should have held was gone, stolen. The lunar core was stolen. It wasn't just a relic. It was our anchor. A crystal the size of a human heart, birthed in the collision of a meteorite and a moonstone lode line, it pulsed with a steady, calming energy. That energy regulated the beast within every member of the order. It kept the rage from boiling over, kept the man tethered to the wolf, kept us from becoming the very monsters we hunted, the Riven. Without it, every one of us was a ticking bomb. Raven was already in command, his voice cutting through the rising panic of the other packs arriving at the scene. "Secure the perimeter. No one enters or leaves. Kalen, with me. Gron, watch the entrance. Lex, Kyle on me." His face was a mask of cold fury, but his eyes, those flint chip eyes that saw everything, were scanning, analyzing, dissecting the violation. While the other alphas were shouting, Raven was investigating. Kalen moved like a wraith around the pedestal, his gaze sweeping the floor. He knelt, his fingers hovering over a spot near the base. "Raven," he said, his voice a low whisper. "Look." I moved closer. Lying on the polished stone was something no bigger than my thumbnail. It was a feather, but not from any bird. It was carved from what looked like pure obsidian, impossibly thin and sharp enough to shave with. It seemed to drink the torchlight, a sliver of perfect darkness. "Don't touch it with your bare hands," Raven commanded. But it was too late. My instinct screamed, a primal part of me recognizing a predator's spoor. I reached down, my fingers brushing its razor edge. The world dissolved into a cacophony of stone and fury. It wasn't my vision, not the wolf's. It was an imprint, a memory left behind by the thief. I saw through its eyes, a shattered stone face, a jaw that clicked and ground, leathery wings folded tight against a chiseled back. But the eyes were the worst. They weren't the mindless red of a demon or the feral gold of a beast. They were embers of ancient, calculating intelligence, burning with a cold, contemptuous fire. I felt its power, a magic that didn't flow but was bled from the rock itself. Then the vision shattered, leaving me gasping, a searing headache lancing through my skull. "Lex!" Raven's hand was on my shoulder, steadying me. "What did you see?" "A gargoyle," I choked out, the word tasting like ash, but it was alive, and it was smart. An hour later, the evidence mounted. The only surviving guard from the attack, a grizzled old warrior named Ulrich, lay dying in the infirmary. His body was covered in deep, precise gashes that looked like they'd been carved with chisels. The Order's best healers couldn't close them. The wounds refused to knit, weeping a thin, black ichor. "A shadow," Ulrich rasped, his eyes wide with terror and pain. A shadow with wings came through the stone, like smoke, not like breaking it. Just passed through. He grabbed my arm, his grip surprisingly strong. Its eyes, they were like coals from the deepest pits of hell. It wasn't a beast. It was a jailer. He coughed, a spray of blood dotting his lips, and his voice dropped to a terrified whisper. It didn't look like it was stealing something. It looked like it was liberating it. The High Council convened in the Chamber of Echoes, the air thick with the smell of old stone and rising fear. The elders, their faces grim, listened as reports flooded in from across the citadel. 2 Omegas in the training pens had already lost control, attacking their instructors in a blind frenzy before being subdued. A Beta on watch duty had clawed his own eyes out, screaming about the moon burning him. The chaos was starting. Raven stood before them, a pillar of calm in the storm. He laid the obsidian feather, now wrapped in sanctified leather, on the great stone table. He relayed our findings, his voice flat and professional. Then all eyes turned to me. I described my vision, the cold intelligence, the feeling of ancient, malevolent power. When I said the word gargoyle, a silence of the tomb fell over the chamber. These were beings of myth, architects of ruin from the Elder Knights, supposedly wiped out millennia ago. The final nail in our coffin was hammered in by Lyra, the Order's chief alchemist. She was a woman whose age was impossible to guess, her eyes holding the weight of forgotten formulas. "The core's residual energy field is collapsing," she announced, her voice devoid of hope. "It kept the lunar influence in balance. Without it, the pull of the full moon, even when it isn't visible, will become absolute. I give it 7 days. 7 days until the moon fever begins. A cascading, irreversible descent into the riven state for every member of the Order under this mountain. 7 days until our fortress became a mass grave, filled with mindless monsters that used to be our brothers. The mission was a suicide run, and there was only one team for it. Raven didn't wait to be asked. The ghost hunters will retrieve the core." He turned and walked out, not waiting for their approval. We followed him. Back in our Spartan briefing room, he looked at each of us, his gaze lingering for a moment. He saw Gron, our Beta, a mountain of muscle whose fists couldn't punch a magical trail. He saw Kaelin, our scout, whose tracking skills were about to be tested against a creature that walked through walls. He saw Kyle, another Omega like me who was visibly trembling but hadn't run. And he saw me. Lex, the team's seer, their secret weapon, and the kid with a vampire's curse festering in his soul. In the privacy of his coat pocket, I saw his hand briefly clench around a small, flat object. The obsidian disc Isolde had given him. He didn't pull it out. This was an Order problem. He wouldn't invite the snakes into our house. Not yet. "Pack light. Move fast," he commanded, his voice like stones grinding together. "We're hunting a myth, and the clock is ticking." We rode out under a starless sky, the urgency of our mission a physical weight on our shoulders. There was no physical trail to follow. The gargoyle hadn't left a single footprint. What it had left was a wound. Kaelin, holding the obsidian feather, described it as a tear in the world's skin. It was a trail of corrupted energy, a psychic scar that only he and I could perceive. For me, it was a discordant hum at the edge of hearing. For Kaelin, it was a shimmering distortion in the air, a path of wrongness leading us ever eastward. The land itself seemed to die as we followed the trail. We rode through forests where the trees were twisted into agonized shapes, their bark peeling back to reveal wood the color of old bruises. The grass under our horses' hooves was brittle and black, crumbling to dust. There was no bird song, no rustle of wildlife in the undergrowth. Just the sound of our breathing and the ceaseless phantom hum of the gargoyle's passage. The lack of the lunar core's influence was a constant growing pressure. For me, it was a gnawing emptiness in my gut, a space that the wolf's primal hunger was trying to fill. My senses, normally a finely tuned instrument, were becoming a curse. The whisper of the wind through the dead trees sounded like screams of the damned. The faint scent of decay rising from the soil was so overwhelming it made me gag. The beast inside me was pacing, rattling the bars of its cage, and the bars were starting to feel flimsy. On the second night, we made camp in the shelter of some skeletal rock formations. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Gron, our usually stoic beta, was cleaning his massive war axe. He applied a bit too much pressure while tightening the leather grip, and the thick hickory handle snapped with a crack that sounded like a gunshot in the dead silence. He stared at the two pieces in his hands, his face a mixture of shock and dawning horror. It was the first sign. The fine control was slipping away from all of us. "Easy, big man," Raven said, his voice low and steady, though I could see the tightness around his eyes. "We're all on edge." "It's more than that," Gron rumbled, his voice rough with self-disgust. I couldn't even feel it, my own strength. That night, Raven gathered us around the low fire. He unrolled an ancient map, its parchment cracked with age. "The trail is heading for the glaive's edge," he said, tapping a dark, jagged region of the map. "But the locals have another name for it. The Valley of Death." He told us the legends. It was a place where the world had been wounded in the Elder Wars against the demon lords. A place so saturated with death and dark magic that nothing grew, and the very ground was said to scream at night. And in the heart of that valley, the legends claimed, the first ones had constructed a prison. A labyrinth called the ossuarium, the bone pit, designed to hold something so terrible that even they feared to destroy it. "No one who has entered the valley has ever been seen again," Raven concluded, his gaze sweeping over us. "Whatever this gargoyle is, it's heading home, or to its master." The warning came at dawn on the fourth day. On the gray, dusty plains that formed the valley's entrance, we found a nomad camp, or what was left of it. Tents were shredded, wagons overturned and splintered. The bodies of the tribesmen were scattered across the grounds, their limbs torn from their sockets with brutal, explosive force. But they hadn't been fed on. This wasn't a killing for sustenance. It was a massacre, a statement. Kaelin knelt, examining the churned earth. "Raven," he called out, his voice tight. "We have a problem." He pointed to the ground. Alongside the strange, three-toed tracks of the gargoyle, there were other prints. Hoof prints. Massive cloven hoof prints sunk a foot deep into the hard-packed earth. Prints left by something bipedal, impossibly heavy, and filled with violent rage. "It has a pet," Gron grunted, his hand resting on the pommel of his spare sword. "Or a cellmate," Raven corrected grimly. "We're not just walking into a lair. We're breaking into a prison." The entrance to the ossuarium was more horrific than any legend could have described. It was a colossal archway at least 60 feet high, constructed entirely from the bleached, interlocking bones of creatures that had no place in the natural world. Rib cages of leviathans formed the curve, and the leg bones of giants served as the pillars. The entire structure hummed with a low, vibrating frequency that made the fillings in my teeth ache and sent a wave of nausea through me. The air was unnaturally still and cold, heavy with the dust of powdered bone and the psychic stench of millennia of fear. "Stay close," Raven ordered, drawing his silver core blade. "Swords out. This place is alive and it's hungry." We passed under the bone arch, stepping from the gray twilight of the valley into a profound, suffocating darkness. The moment my heel cleared the threshold, a deep groan echoed around us, and the world shook. I spun around just in time to see the archway collapse inward, a catastrophic avalanche of bone and rock that sealed the entrance completely. Dust and debris rained down, and when it cleared, there was only a solid wall of ancient stone and fused bone. We were trapped. Before the dust even settled, the attack came. The walls of the corridor, which I now saw were also made of countless skulls and bones mortared together, began to move. Bones detached themselves, clicking and scraping as they assembled into new, horrifying forms. They were spiders, the size of large dogs, with bodies made of fused vertebrae, legs of sharpened femurs, and mandibles crafted from splintered jawbones. Bone weavers. A volley of razor-sharp rib fragments shot from their bodies, clattering against our armor. One embedded itself deep in Kyle's shield. Then they charged, scuttling forward with an unnatural speed, their spindly legs clicking a deathly rhythm on the stone floor. They didn't just attack. They tried to ensnare us, spitting thick, ropey strands of what looked like desiccated sinew. "Break them!" Gron roared, his fear turning to rage. He waded into them, his heavy sword a blur of motion, shattering bone carapaces with every swing. But for everyone he destroyed, two more seemed to crawl out of the walls, reassembling from the debris. Kyle, his face pale but his hands steady, fired silver-tipped bolts from his crossbow, pinning the creatures to the walls. Raven and Kalen fought back-to-back, a whirlwind of deadly precise steel. I stood my ground, my sword in hand, but my attention was elsewhere. I closed my eyes, pushing past the chaos of the fight, and focused on the labyrinth itself. I could feel it. It wasn't just stone and bone. It was a consciousness, ancient and malevolent. It was aware of us. It was tasting our fear, our desperation, and it was using it to fuel its creations. This wasn't just a structure, it was a living predator, and we were trapped in its gullet. The Bone Weavers were just the welcome party. After we finally crushed the last of them, leaving piles of splintered bone and shredded sinew on the floor, we were faced with a new horror, the labyrinth itself. The ossuarium wasn't a static place. It was a digestive tract, and it was constantly in motion. We'd walked down a long corridor only to find the way back had become a solid wall of fused skulls. The floor beneath our feet would shift, entire sections dropping away into bottomless pits or rising to create impassable barriers. The air itself seemed to twist, creating disorienting optical illusions, making a straight path appear to curve into infinity. Our only compass was the festering wound left by the gargoyle. With my eyes closed, I could perceive it as an ugly black tear in the fabric of this place, a line of pure wrongness. The lunar core was a faint, desperate pinprick of golden light far ahead of it, a beacon of hope being dragged into the abyss. I was the navigator, the only one who could guide us through the shifting insanity. We entered a vast, cavernous hall shaped like a perfect dome. The acoustics were a nightmare. Every sound, from the scuff of a boot to the clink of armor, was amplified 1,000 times, echoing and distorting until it became a physical assault. Kyle, not realizing, whispered my name, and the sound exploded like a thunderclap, sending us all to our knees with our hands clamped over our ears, blood trickling from Kyle's nose. "Silence," Raven mouthed, his face grim. Total silence. Gron, frustrated, slammed a gauntleted fist against a nearby wall. The resulting boom was a shockwave that cracked the stone and nearly deafened us. We understood. We had to cross this hall, a space easily the size of a football field, without making a single sound. We became ghosts, communicating only through the hand signals Raven had drilled into us for years. It was in that suffocating silence that they came for us. They didn't have bodies, not really. They were like heat haze in the air, patches of deeper darkness that coalesced in the corners of our vision. The Whisperers. They didn't attack our flesh. They went straight for the soul. A sibilant voice, sounding like dry leaves skittering across pavement, slithered directly into my mind. "You are tainted, Lex. The vampire's gift blossoms within you. Can you feel it? The thirst? Your brothers look so vital." I stumbled, my hand flying to the hilt of my sword. I looked at Gron, and for a terrifying second I saw not my brother in arms, but a vessel of hot, coursing blood. The curse flared, a cold fire in my veins. I wasn't the only one. Gron stared at his own hands, his knuckles white. I could almost hear the thoughts being poured into his head. "Your control is gone. You are a beast. You will turn on them. You will tear them apart." Kalen's head was twitching, his eyes darting towards every shadow, the whispers no doubt playing on his tracker's paranoia, telling him he was being hunted, surrounded, already dead. I saw Kyle's eyes fill with tears as he clutched his crossbow, the voices likely reminding him of every mistake, every failure, every fallen comrade he blamed himself for. Raven's face was stone, but a muscle jumped in his jaw, the only sign that he too was under assault. "You led them here to die, Raven. Just like the last time." The whispers focused on me, their primary target. They saw the crack in my soul, the vampire's curse, and they poured all their venom into it. The world around me faded, replaced by a vision so real I could taste the blood in the air. I saw myself, but my eyes were burning crimson. Fangs descended from my gums. I was standing over the broken bodies of my team, my hands dripping with their blood, a triumphant, inhuman snarl on my lips. The feeling was not one of horror, but of ecstatic release, of power. "No!" I screamed, the sound shattering the silence and rocking the chamber. I didn't even realize I had drawn my sword until I saw it arcing towards Kyle. A hand like a steel vice clamped down on my wrist, stopping the blade inches from Kyle's throat. It was Raven. His other hand cracked across my face, a sharp, stinging blow that jolted me back to reality. The vision shattered. I was standing in the bone labyrinth, my sword raised against my friend, my face wet with tears. "Fight it, Lex." Raven's voice was a low, urgent growl, his eyes boring into mine. "They feed on fear. Don't give them anything to eat." He looked at the others, all of them teetering on the brink of their own personal hells. "The vow!" he roared. "Recite the vow, now!" His voice, raw and powerful, cut through the psychic poison. We clung to it like drowning men to a lifeline. "In the sight of the moon," I began, my voice trembling. "I pledge my blood to the Order." Gron joined in, his voice a deep rumble that seemed to push back the shadows. I pledge my fang to the innocent, Kalen added, his jaw clenched. I pledge my claw to the darkness, Kyle finished, his voice gaining strength. We repeated it, over and over. I am the shield in the night. I am the hunter of the unholy. I am the guardian of the balance. The words weren't just a promise. They were an incantation, a declaration of who we were. They built a fortress in our minds, a wall of purpose and brotherhood that the whispers could not penetrate. The shadowy forms of the whisperers recoiled, hissing in frustration, and then dissolved back into the oppressive silence. We crossed the rest of the hall, shaken to our core. The trust between us was fractured. Kyle kept a wary distance from me. Gron wouldn't look at his own hands. And I now knew what the curse was capable of. I had felt the joy in that murderous vision. The labyrinth hadn't just attacked us. It had shown us the monsters we could become. As we exited the hall into a narrow, winding passage, my foot brushed against something. It was the remains of a knight in ancient, plate-and-mail armor, his bones long since turned to dust within the metal shell. His gauntleted hand still clutched the hilt of his sword and a small, leather-bound journal. The leather crumbled at my touch, the pages turning to flakes. But I managed to read the last sentence, scrawled in a frantic, fading script. It is not merely the guardian. It is the heart of this place. It hears your own heartbeat. Do not run. Never run. The next chamber was a trap for the soul. It was a perfect hexagon, perhaps 100 feet across, and every wall was lined with polished, jet-black obsidian that functioned like a mirror. But these mirrors didn't reflect our weary, battered faces. They reflected our failures. I stared at the wall in front of me and saw not stone, but the dark cave where we'd fought the Riven. I watched myself hesitate, frozen by the creature's psychic assault. I saw Raven forced to shout my name to break the spell, a moment of weakness that had nearly cost me my life. The mirror twisted the memory, amplifying my shame, whispering that my hesitation was proof of my cowardice. To my right, Gron stood transfixed, his massive shoulders slumped. In his mirror, a younger, beardless version of himself stood before a chieftain with a face like a thundercloud, his father. I heard the booming voice echo from the obsidian. You have the strength of a bear, but the heart of a rabbit. You hesitate to kill. You are no son of mine. Gron flinched as if struck. Kalen stared into his own reflection, watching a training exercise from years ago. A simple mistake. A misread trail that led his partner into an ambush. He watched the man die, heard his last choked cry for help, over and over again. And Kyle. Poor Kyle was on his knees, his face buried in his hands. His mirror showed him cowering behind a rock while another Omega, a boy he'd grown up with, was torn apart by a ghoul on his very first mission. You could have saved me, Kyle, the reflection of the dead boy whispered, his eyes full of accusation. You just ran. The air grew thick and heavy. From the surface of the mirrors, shadows began to bleed out, coalescing on the floor like pools of oil. They rose, taking on vague humanoid shapes, amorphous, featureless things that seemed woven from pure despair. Grief eaters. They drifted towards us, their touch as cold as the grave. One brushed against Kalen's arm, and I saw the life drain from his face. His shoulders sagged, the light in his eyes dimmed, and his dagger suddenly seemed to weigh 1,000 pounds. They didn't inflict pain. They fed on will, siphoning our resolve, leaving behind an empty, hopeless husk. Then I looked back at my own mirror. The scene had changed. It was the moment of Valerius's death, Raven's sword piercing his heart. But in this version, the vampire wasn't dying. He was smiling. He disintegrated, but his essence, a cloud of black smoke, flowed not into nothingness, but straight into me. My reflection straightened, its head snapping up. The golden eyes of the wolf were gone, replaced by the burning, malevolent crimson of the vampire. Fangs slid from its gums, and it smiled a predator's smile, a look of utter triumph. It was the future the whispers had promised me. The shadow that bled from that mirror was different. It was larger, darker, more defined. It had my shape, my build, but it was a hole in the world, and it moved directly for me, its purpose clear: to merge with me, to extinguish the man and unleash the monster. I raised my sword, but my arms were heavy with a sudden, crushing apathy. What was the point? This was my fate. "Lex, no!" A figure slammed into my side, knocking me out of the shadow's path. It was Kyle. He wasn't armed, he wasn't attacking. He just stood there, between me and the mirror, his body shielding me from the horrifying reflection. He was shaking from head to foot, but he held his ground. "That's not you," he yelled, his voice cracking but filled with a surprising fire. "I saw you at Blackwood Creek. I saw you in the hall back there. You fought it. That thing in the mirror is a lie." His words, his simple, terrified act of faith, were like a bucket of ice water. The spell of despair shattered. The shadow self shrieked as the connection was broken, its form wavering. Kyle's belief in me was a stronger shield than any steel. The shift was palpable. A surge of adrenaline, of defiance, shot through me. "He's right," I roared, turning to the others. "It's all a lie. It's a trick to make us give up." Raven's head snapped up, a spark of his old fire returning to his eyes. He looked at the grief eater draining him, then at the mirror that spawned it. "He's right," he growled. "So we break the damn lies." He spun, his silver blade singing through the air, and shattered his mirror with a deafening crash. The grief eater attached to him screamed and dissolved into smoke. It was all the inspiration we needed. A wave of cathartic rage washed over us. We were the ghost hunters. We didn't bow to shadows. Gron let out a bellow of pure primal fury and smashed his father's judgment to pieces with his gauntlet. Kaelin and I went to work, our blades turning the hall into a cacophony of shattering obsidian and dying shrieks. Kyle, armed only with a rock he'd scooped from the floor, joined in, his face set with fierce determination. We were destroying our past, one shard at a time. When the last mirror was broken, we stood panting in a room full of glittering black dust. The grief eaters gone. The oppressive weight was lifted. Kyle met my gaze and gave me a shaky but genuine nod. I nodded back. No words were needed. In that moment, he had faced his own fear to save me from mine. He wasn't a scared rookie anymore. He was a brother. We were a pack again, stronger than before. Our bonds forged not in victory, but in shared weakness and redemption. And it was then, in the sudden echoing silence of the shattered hall, that we all heard it for the first time. It wasn't a roar or a growl. It was a deep, resonant sound that vibrated up through the soles of our boots, a sound like a mountain drawing a slow, sleeping breath. It was the sound of something immense, something ancient, stirring in the heart of the labyrinth ahead. The Guardian was aware of us, and from the sound of it, it was very, very big. The passage out of the mirror hall led us into a cavern so vast it felt like we had stepped outdoors into a moonless night. A faint, greenish-white light emanated from phosphorescent moss clinging to the distant ceiling, casting the chamber in an ethereal, sickly glow. And what it illuminated stopped us dead in our tracks. We were standing at the edge of a garden, but nothing here was alive. Before us lay a surreal landscape of impossible botany, all of it crafted from bone. Slender, delicate flowers with petals made from the fused finger bones of children bloomed on stems of polished vertebrae. Great, weeping willows with trailing branches of linked ribcages drooped over a dry riverbed paved with knucklebones. Thorny vines, assembled from sharpened teeth, snaked up the cavern walls. The air was thick with a cloying, sweet scent, like lilies and formaldehyde, a perfume of beautiful decay. "What in God's name is this place?" Kyle whispered, a note of horrified awe in his voice. He took a step forward, drawn to a particularly large flower, a perfect lily formed from the bleached white ribs of some small animal. He leaned in, mesmerized by its intricate, grotesque beauty. He inhaled, and then he started to choke. His hands flew to his throat, his eyes wide with panic. He fell to his knees, making horrible gagging sounds, his face turning a deep purple. "Spores!" Raven yelled, rushing to his side. "It's a fungus! Get back!" He ripped open his medical kit, his hands a blur as he searched for a poultice. "It's corpse bloom fungus!" he grunted, forcing Kyle onto his back. "Grows in the lungs. It'll suffocate him in minutes." He pulled out a pouch of herbs, then swore. "Damn it. The main neutralizing agent is moonherb. I'm out. It only grows in absolute darkness, usually deep crevices." My eyes, already adjusted to the gloom, scanned the cavern. The wolf's sight cut through the pale moss light. On the far side of the garden, maybe 200 yards away, I saw it. A deep, black fissure in the cavern wall, a place the light didn't touch. "There!" I shouted, pointing. "Raven, I see a cave." "Gron with him," Raven commanded, not looking up from his desperate attempts to keep Kyle's airway clear. "Go!" We didn't hesitate. Gron and I plunged into the bone garden. The moment we did, the place came alive. The ground beneath my feet shifted as bony roots erupted, trying to trip me. The weeping willow of ribs suddenly whipped its branches at us, the bone ends sharpened to points. To my left, a bush of thorny teeth spat a volley of its deadly needles, forcing Gron to block them with his gauntlet. This wasn't just a garden. It was a single symbiotic organism, and we were a threat. A thick, thorny vine shot out, wrapping around my ankle, its teeth digging into my leather boot. I was jerked off my feet, dragged back towards a patch of the lily-like flowers. Gron didn't even break stride. He spun, his war axe a silver arc in the dim light, and severed the vine with a single, powerful blow. "Keep moving!" he roared, his voice a guttural bellow. He wasn't just fighting anymore. He was becoming a force of nature. He saw Kyle on the ground, his life fading, and that sight ignited a fire in him. This wasn't the uncontrolled rage from the night he broke his axe handle. This was a focused, protective fury. He became a living battering ram, his axe and his sheer mass clearing a path. He uprooted the smaller bone plants, smashed through the thorny hedges, and ignored the sharpened bone shrapnel that glanced off his heavy plate armor. He wasn't just my escort. He was my shield. I reached the fissure, a crack barely wide enough for me to squeeze through. Inside, the darkness was absolute, a palpable velvety black. But for my senses, it was as clear as day. Patches of the moon herb grew here, glowing with a faint, silvery light that only our kind could see. I grabbed handfuls, stuffing them into my pouch. The cool, minty feel of the leaves, a small comfort in this place of death. I scrambled back out to find Gron holding off a dozen lashing rib vines, a defiant giant in a forest of horrors. "Got it!" I yelled. He laid down a final, devastating barrage of swings, giving me a clear path back to Raven. I slid to a stop, thrusting the pouch of herbs at him. Raven worked with lightning speed, crushing the leaves into a paste and mixing it with a binding fluid. He pried Kyle's jaw open and forced the poultice down his throat. For a long, agonizing moment, nothing happened. Then, Kyle's body convulsed. He let out a final rattling cough, and a thick, fibrous mass of white thread-like tendrils spewed from his mouth onto the bone-littered ground. He sucked in a deep, shuddering breath of air, the color slowly returning to his face. He was alive. Gron gently lifted Kyle, who was now as limp as a rag doll, and slung him over his shoulder. We stood there for a moment, catching our breath amidst the now still garden, the sweet, deadly scent still hanging in the air. We were alive, but the cost was mounting. Our supplies were dwindling. Our bodies were battered, and the labyrinth was taking its toll. As we moved on, a new, more primal sensation began to gnaw at me. Hunger, not the simple emptiness of a missed meal. This was the deep, aching void of the wolf, a void no longer pacified by the lunar core. It was a raw, predatory instinct, and as I looked at the vulnerable form of Kyle draped over Gron's back, a dark, terrible thought slithered through my mind. The thought of snapping bone, of hot blood. I pushed it down, disgusted and horrified, but I knew. The beast was getting stronger, and it was starting to look at my brothers not as a pack, but as prey. The path from the bone garden descended sharply, leading us into the humid depths of the mountain. The air grew heavy, and a low, rushing sound reached our ears. We emerged into another massive cavern, this one bisected by a wide, slow-moving river. The water, if you could call it that, was the color of polished obsidian, perfectly black and opaque. No light reflected off its surface. It simply swallowed it. A palpable cold rolled off it, a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature and everything to do with a profound, soul-deep wrongness. On the far bank, some 50 yards away, I could feel it. The faint golden pulse of the lunar core and the jagged, hateful scar of the gargoyle's trail. "What is that?" Kyle asked, his voice still hoarse. He had recovered enough to walk on his own, though he leaned heavily on Gron for support. Raven stood at the river's edge, his face a grim mask. He picked up a fist-sized rock and tossed it into the current. There was no splash. No sound. The rock simply vanished the moment it touched the surface, as if it had never existed. "Don't touch the water," he said, his voice low and serious. Kalen, ever the empiricist, drew an arrow from his quiver. He cautiously dipped the wooden shaft into the black liquid. When he pulled it out, the half of the arrow that had been submerged was gone. Not broken, not dissolved, just gone. "It's the river of Styx from the old myths," he breathed. "Or something like it. A river of non-being. Oblivion." We knew then that swimming across was not an option. Any contact meant erasure. Either a death so complete it would wipe you from history, or a scouring of the mind that would leave you a drooling vegetable. We began to walk along the bank, searching for a bridge, a ford, any way to cross. The walls of this cavern were different. They were covered in ancient, masterfully carved bas-reliefs. They told a story in stone. A great war, with warriors in wolf pelt armor, much like our order's founders, battling a colossal beast with the body of a man and the head of a bull. In the final panel, the wolf warriors were shown sealing the defeated creature inside a labyrinth made of bone. This wasn't just a prison. It was a tomb, built for a god or a demon. As we walked, figures began to rise from the black water. They were translucent and shimmering, their forms vaguely human but distorted, as if seen through immense pressure. the drowned, the souls of those who had failed to cross. They didn't scream or attack. They drifted towards us, their arms outstretched, their silent mouths open in a plea. Their touch was like being packed in freezer ice. It leached the warmth from our bodies and the hope from our hearts. "Don't let them touch you," Raven warned, batting a grasping, spectral hand away with the flat of his blade. "They feed on life force, on memory." The drowned became more numerous, a silent, pleading wall of ghosts between us and the river. Their despair was a palpable force, a siren's call to just give up, to step into the cool, quiet blackness and end the struggle. I saw Kyle's eyes glaze over. He took a shuffling step towards the water, his face a mask of weary resignation. "It's so quiet," he mumbled. "They just want peace." "There is no peace there, kid," Gron barked, pulling him back from the edge. "Only nothing." It was Gron who found our salvation. Piled against the cavern wall was the complete, fossilized skeleton of some immense serpentine creature, its bones thick as tree trunks. "We build a raft," he stated, the simple, practical plan cutting through the magical dread. As we worked, heaving the massive vertebrae and ribs towards the water, the drowned grew more desperate. They swirled around us, their icy fingers brushing our armor, their silent pleas turning our minds to slush. We lashed the bones together with our spare rope and leather straps, our hands clumsy with cold and encroaching apathy. Finally, the crude skeletal raft was ready. We pushed it into the Black River, where it floated with an unnatural buoyancy. We scrambled aboard, pushing off the bank with our sword pommels. The journey was a slow, nerve-wracking nightmare. The drowned swarmed us, their ghostly hands gripping the sides of the raft, their collective weight trying to drag us under. We had to beat them back, a frantic, desperate defense against the dead, all while trying not to let a single drop of the oblivion water splash onto us. The raft creaked and groaned, the bone vertebrae grinding against each other. We were almost to the other side when a particularly large shade, the ghost of some armored warrior, lunged for Kalen. He shoved it back with his bow, but in the process his left hand dipped into the river up to the wrist. He cried out, a sharp gasp of pain and shock. He yanked his hand out of the water instantly. It was still there, but it was horrifyingly changed. The skin on his fingers and the back of his hand was suddenly wrinkled and thin as parchment, covered in liver spots. His knuckles were swollen with arthritis, and his fingernails were yellowed and brittle. In the space of a heartbeat, his hand had aged 50 years. He tried to make a fist, but his fingers were stiff, trembling with a palsy he couldn't control. We scrambled onto the far bank, the raft breaking apart and sinking soundlessly into the black water behind us. We had made it, but Kalen, our master archer, our scout whose life depended on a steady hand and a keen eye, now stared at a traitorous, withered claw that had once been his left hand. The river had taken its toll. He was wounded in a way no medicine could heal. The corridor leading from the river was short and straight, ending in a perfect archway. As we passed through it, we found ourselves on the edge of a vast, circular arena, its floor paved with smooth, cracked flagstones. The air was heavy with the weight of ages, and a low, guttural breathing sound echoed from the center. There, sitting on a throne-like pile of skulls and shattered armor, was the Guardian, the Minotaur. The bas-reliefs hadn't done it justice. It was immense, a good 10 feet tall even when seated. Its body was a knotted mass of muscle and scar tissue, the physique of a creature born for nothing but violence. Its bull head was massive, with a pair of thick, curving horns that had been chipped and broken in countless battles. But its eyes held the greatest shock. They weren't the dumb, red glowing orbs of a mindless beast. They were a dull, weary bronze, and they glowed with a dim, ancient, and utterly sentient light. This was no monster. This was a king on his throne of ruin. In its lap rested a colossal, double-bitted axe, its head carved from the fang of some primordial beast. It watched us approach, its gaze passing over each of us before settling on me. When it spoke, its voice was the sound of gravestones grinding together, a bass rumble that vibrated in my chest. I could feel its name in my mind, a name given to it by the labyrinth itself. Gravehorn. "So, the little wolves have made it past the garden and the river," it rumbled, not moving from its throne. "You are not the first to seek an exit from my prison, but you are the first to follow the shadow. The winged thing passed this way. It defiled my home with its alien wrongness. It paid a toll to pass. What toll do you offer, Sons of the Moon?" Raven stepped forward, his sword held in a non-threatening downward position. "We offer no toll. We hunt the one you call the Shadow. It has stolen something vital to our kind. We mean you no harm, Guardian. Let us pass." Gravehorn let out a low, dry chuckle that sounded like a rock slide. "Let you pass? My purpose is not to guard the way out. It is to ensure there is no way out. This labyrinth is my tomb as much as it is my prison. I am bound to it, and it is bound to me." He shifted, the pile of skulls grinding beneath his weight. The winged one was clever. It understood power. It could not defeat me, so it bargained. It fed me a sliver of the light it carried, a taste of the moon power your kind covets. In exchange, I allowed it to pass. He pointed a thick, meaty finger at a glowing crystal embedded in the pommel of his axe. It pulsed with a faint, familiar golden light. A piece of the lunar core. "I will offer you the same choice," the Minotaur said, its voice flat. "This piece of light is yours. It is not enough to save your whole order, but it may be enough to save a few. Your leaders, perhaps, the strongest of you. In return, your lives are forfeit. You will stay here, in the ossuarium, and your souls will feed the walls when you die, strengthening my prison for another millennium." It was an impossible, monstrous choice. Save a handful of our people at the cost of our own lives and souls, or fight an ancient demigod for the chance to save everyone. Raven didn't hesitate for a second. "We will take all of it, or we will die trying." Gravehorn nodded slowly, a strange, almost sad expression in its bronze eyes. Honor, a heavy burden to carry into one's grave. He rose from his throne, seeming to grow until he blotted out the dim light from the passage behind us. "I am weary of this prison. I will be glad to be rid of it." He hefted his massive axe, its bone head scraping against the flagstones. "Come then, little wolves. Show me if your honor has teeth." The battle was not one of strength, but survival. Gron, letting out a defiant roar, met the Minotaur's first charge. The impact of his sword against the shaft of Gravehorn's axe sent a shockwave through the arena. Gron was thrown back 10 feet, his shield arm numb. A direct confrontation was suicide. "Scatter!" Raven yelled. "Use the space! Don't let it corner you!" We moved, a dance of desperation around the lumbering behemoth. Its attacks were slow but devastating. Every time its axe struck the floor, flagstones shattered, sending shards of rock flying like shrapnel. We were gnats trying to sting a bull. But as I dodged and weaved, I felt something else. The labyrinth wasn't just a location, it was a power source. I could feel the energy flowing up from the bone-littered floor, feeding the Minotaur, mending its minor wounds, fueling its impossible strength. He was the heart of this place, just as the knight's journal had said. But the flow wasn't uniform. There were nodes, weak points in the arena floor where the connection was thinner. It was a network, and I could see it. "Raven!" I shouted, ducking under a wide horizontal swing that could have cut me in half. "Its power comes from the floor. There are weak spots. Aim for the cracked stone by the western pillar." Raven understood immediately. He wasn't just a warrior. He was a strategist. The fight changed. It became a coordinated effort, a deadly game of chess. My role was the spotter. I called out the weak points, the fluctuations in the Minotaur's power. "Kaelin, draw its attention left. Gron, it's about to charge. Get ready to force it towards the center." Kaelin, despite his withered hand, knocked an arrow. His shot was unsteady, wobbling in the air, but it struck the Minotaur's shoulder, a pinprick that served its purpose. The beast roared in annoyance and turned towards him. Kyle, seeing an opening, rolled a length of chain he'd salvaged into its path, a desperate attempt to trip it. It worked. The Minotaur's hoof caught in the chain, causing it to stumble for a precious second as it passed over a weak node I had identified. "Now!" Raven bellowed. He and Gron charged from opposite sides, their blades striking the Minotaur's legs simultaneously. For the first time, they drew blood, a thick, dark fluid that steamed where it hit the stone. The beast roared, a sound of genuine pain this time, and the real fight began. Wounding Gravehorn was like kicking a hornet's nest. The weary intelligence in its eyes vanished, replaced by the blazing fury of a cornered god. It let out a roar that shook the very foundations of the arena and stomped its massive hoof on the ground. The entire chamber shuddered. From the ceiling, massive stalactites of fused bone, each the size of a car, rained down, shattering on the floor and turning the open arena into a treacherous, shifting maze of deadly pillars. The fight had entered its second, far more lethal phase. The Minotaur was no longer just a warrior. It was the avatar of the labyrinth's destructive will. It charged through the newly formed pillars, smashing them to powder, its axe a blur of motion. It was trying to separate us, to pick us off one by one. I scrambled behind a jagged spire of bone as its axe obliterated the spot where I'd been standing. The thing was learning, adapting. It knew I was the one guiding the others, and now it was hunting me with a terrifying single-mindedness. I was fast, but it was relentless. It backed me into a corner against the arena wall. There was nowhere left to run. I raised my sword, a futile gesture against the descending arc of its bone-white axe. This was it. Lex. A red-bearded blur slammed into the Minotaur from the side. Gron. He had thrown aside his dented shield and his sword, opting for pure, desperate force. He crashed into the beast's side, not even trying to wound it, just trying to throw off its killing blow. The axe, diverted from its path, slammed into the wall beside me, spraying me with stone chips. Gravehorn roared in fury, swatting Gron away like a fly, but the big man was relentless. He came back, and as the Minotaur raised its axe for another strike, Gron did the unthinkable. He charged forward straight into the attack and caught the massive axe blade on his shoulder. The sound of bone crunching and armor tearing was sickening. The blade bit deep, nearly severing his arm. But Gron didn't fall. He roared, a sound of pure, unadulterated agony and defiance, and clamped both of his powerful hands around the axe blade lodged in his own body. Blood poured down his arm, but his grip was iron. He was holding the Minotaur in place. "Finish it!" he bellowed, his face a mask of excruciating pain. That one moment of heroic, insane sacrifice was the only opening we were ever going to get. Raven and Kalen seized it. Kalen, his face a grim mask of concentration, drew his last arrow. He held his withered left hand as steady as he could, aimed, and let fly. The arrow sailed true, burying itself deep in the Minotaur's right eye. The beast screamed, a high, piercing sound of shock and agony, dropping its axe as it clawed at its ruined face. And in that same instant, Raven was moving. He used Gron's massive, immobile body as a launching point, running up his back and leaping onto the Minotaur's shoulders. He clung on like a limpet, raised his silver sword high, and plunged it down with all his might into the base of the creature's skull, right where the spine met the brainstem. There was a final shuddering sigh. The incandescent rage in Gravehorn's remaining eye flickered and died, replaced by that ancient, weary sadness. The massive body went limp. "Thank you," it whispered, a voice that was no longer a rumble but a faint, ghostly echo. And then it crumbled. The entire 10-foot-tall behemoth disintegrated into a pile of gray dust and shattered bone, leaving nothing behind but its colossal axe and the profound, ringing silence of its death. The moment it vanished, the entire labyrinth groaned, a deep, structural tremor that knocked us off our feet. The oppressive, malevolent consciousness of the place was gone. The prison was broken. We had won, but the cost was staggering. Gron collapsed, unconscious, a river of blood pouring from the catastrophic wound in his shoulder. Kalen knelt, his quiver empty, his ruined hand trembling uncontrollably. Kyle was huddled against a pillar, his eyes wide with the shock of battle. And I was drained, my mind and body screaming from the strain of guiding the fight and resisting the labyrinth's psychic assault. As the dust settled, we saw it. Behind the throne of skulls where the Minotaur had first sat, the wall had slid away, revealing a dark, smooth-walled tunnel. It wasn't made of bone. The walls were polished obsidian, covered in complex alien symbols that pulsed with a faint violet light. It felt wrong, unnatural. "The gargoyle," Raven rasped, kneeling beside Gron, trying to staunch the bleeding. "It's in there." He looked at us, his face smeared with grime and monster blood. The golden glow of the lunar core, the very reason we were here, felt stronger now, pulling us forward. Raven managed to bind Gron's wound enough to stop the worst of the bleeding. With a grunt, he hoisted our giant unconscious brother onto his remaining good shoulder. "Let's finish this," he said. Limping, bleeding, and utterly exhausted, we staggered into the final chamber, into the heart of the enemy's lair. The tunnel opened into a cavern that defied the laws of nature. It was a perfect sphere, the obsidian walls so smooth they reflected the violet, pulsating light of the runes carved into every inch of their surface. The air was buzzing with raw power, making the hairs on my arms stand up. In the exact center of the chamber stood a monolithic altar of the same black stone, stained with what looked like centuries of dried blood. And on that altar lay the lunar core. It was no longer the beacon of pure golden white light I remembered. It was diseased. Veins of black and violet energy crawled across its crystalline surface, corrupting it from within. This dark energy was being siphoned out of it, flowing like liquid shadow towards a massive stone archway that stood behind the altar. The archway itself was inert stone, but the space within it was no longer empty. It was a swirling, chaotic vortex of purple and black energy, a maelstrom of raw power, a portal. Perched atop the altar, its claws dug deep into the lunar core, was the gargoyle. It turned its stony head as we entered, and a sound like grinding rocks scraped from its throat, a crude approximation of a laugh. Its ember-like eyes glowed with triumph. "You are too late, moon pups," it hissed, its voice a chorus of scraping granite. "Its power has opened the way. My king is coming." With a final triumphant shriek, it plunged its talons deeper into the core. The crystal screamed, a sound both audible and psychic, and unleashed a final massive pulse of dark energy. The vortex in the archway roared to life, stabilizing into a shimmering violet gateway to some other hellish dimension. The gargoyle, now crackling with the siphoned power, launched itself from the altar. It wasn't flying. It was a streaking cannonball of living stone. It slammed into Gron's unconscious form on Raven's shoulder, sending both of them crashing to the floor. Before Kalen could even aim a dagger, it was on him, a backhand blow from its stony fist, sending him flying into the wall. It moved with a speed and ferocity that defied its appearance. We were wounded, exhausted, and it was a predator at the peak of its power. It batted me aside like a toy, its claws leaving deep gouges in my chest plate, and landed before Kyle, its jagged smile widening. It was toying with us, reveling in our weakness before the final kill. As I struggled to my feet, my gaze locked on the corrupted lunar core on the altar. I felt its pain, a deep, resonant agony that echoed the hollowness inside my own soul. And in that moment, the vampire's curse, the dark seed Valerius had planted in me, stirred. It didn't offer fear or rage. It offered power. It whispered to me, a seductive promise in the back of my mind. It was connected to the same dark energy that fueled the portal. I could feel it, a wellspring of terrible strength just waiting to be tapped. I could use it. I could let the darkness in, just for a moment, and have the power to shatter that stone creature. But I knew with chilling certainty that if I opened that door, I might never be able to close it again. My moment of choice was stolen from me. The gargoyle let out another grating laugh. It had finished playing. With a final, contemptuous look at us, it bounded back to the altar, snatched the pulsing, weeping lunar core in its claws, and leaped without hesitation into the shimmering portal. It vanished into the violet depths, taking our last hope with it. The mission was a failure. The artifact was gone. For a heartbeat, there was only silence. Then, from the depths of the portal, a new sound began. The rhythmic, earth-shaking tramp of 1,000 marching feet. The clang of unnatural steel. And a guttural, terrifying battle cry that was a language of pure hatred. The first figures began to emerge from the gate. They were not demons of fire and brimstone. They were soldiers. Hulking bipedal creatures clad in jagged black iron armor that seemed to suck the light from the room. Their faces were misshapen, bestial parodies of human features, and their eyes glowed with the same malevolent violet light as the portal. They carried cruel barbed weapons and moved with a terrifying disciplined precision. This was not a random incursion. This was the vanguard of an invading army. Raven struggled to his feet, pulling the barely conscious Gron with him. His face was a mask of utter horror and dawning realization. "Back!" he screamed, his voice raw with desperation. "Get back! Now!" There was no victory to be had here. We hadn't just failed to stop a thief. We had been pawns in a much larger game. The labyrinth wasn't a prison for the Minotaur. It was a lock. A seal on this gate. And by killing its guardian, we had just kicked the door wide open for the armies of the abyss. We fled. There was no other word for it. We ran with the terror of prey animals, the disciplined soldiers of the ghost hunters reduced to a desperate, scrambling retreat. Behind us, the otherworldly battle cry of the invaders echoed through the chamber, a sound that promised a world of pain. The ritual hall itself was coming apart, the obsidian walls cracking and groaning under the strain of the portal's raw, untamed energy. The very air tasted of lightning and blood. We scrambled back through the arena, the dust of the Minotaur swirling around our feet. The labyrinth, its heart and mind gone, was collapsing in on itself. Entire corridors caved in behind us, the thunder of falling bone and rock barely drowning out the sounds of our pursuers. The way we came in was gone, buried under 100 tons of rubble. We were trapped in a collapsing tomb with an army from hell. It was Gron who saved us. Roused to a semi-conscious state by Raven, his warrior's spirit refused to let him be a burden. He saw it before any of us, a new fissure in the ceiling of a large cavern, cracked open by the death throes of the labyrinth. A single, pure beam of moonlight sliced through the darkness. An exit. The fissure was a good 30 feet up, the rock around it crumbling. There was no time to climb. Gron, leaning heavily on the wall, looked at Raven. "Throw me," he grunted. It was insane, but it was our only shot. Raven, using the last of his strength, helped Gron get a running start. The giant, bleeding and broken, launched himself upward. He didn't make it, but his massive fist, powered by adrenaline and desperation, slammed into the weakened rock around the fissure. The ceiling exploded outward, creating a cascade of rock and a ragged, blessedly wide hole to the surface. We scrambled up the rock slide, clawing our way out of the grave we had dug for ourselves, and emerged into the cold night air of the Valley of Death. We were free, but the sight that met our eyes offered no relief. The valley below was no longer a place of quiet desolation. It was a wound in the world. A pillar of churning violet light erupted from the spot where the labyrinth's entrance had been, punching a hole in the sky. The stars above were blotted out by a swirling vortex of black clouds, a growing storm of unnatural energy. The invasion had begun. We stood on that desolate hillside, a broken and defeated squad. The mission was a catastrophic failure. We hadn't saved the lunar core. We had handed the enemy the key and held the door open for them. Raven stared down at the unfolding apocalypse, his face etched with a despair I had never seen on him before. He looked at his soldiers. Gron, who had finally collapsed, his life bleeding out onto the dead earth. Kalen, cradling his useless, withered hand. Kyle, shaking, traumatized but alive. And me. When his eyes met mine, I saw a flicker of new fear. He saw it too. The reflection of the violet portal swirling in my pupils. Slowly, his expression hardening into one of grim resolve, Raven reached into his coat. He pulled out the small circular piece of polished black obsidian that the vampire Lady Isolde had given him. He held it in his palm, and as he focused his will upon it, the stone began to grow warm, then hot, glowing with a faint internal light. The time for pride was over. The Order could not fight this. Not alone. He was calling for help, making a deal with the devil to fight the demons at our door. I felt the curse inside me shift. It was no longer just Valerius's dying spite. It was awake, alive, humming in tune with the massive power pouring from the portal. It was a resonance, a connection. I understood with a sudden gut-wrenching certainty. The gargoyle, the cult, the nameless king, they knew about me. They knew what I was becoming. My gift, my sensitivity, had made me a beacon. My corruption wasn't an accident of war. It was part of their plan. I wasn't just a werewolf with a vampire's taint. I was some kind of key. As we watched, the first wave of invaders emerged from the light below. Great, leathery-winged creatures, larger and more menacing than the gargoyle, soared into the sky, their screeching cries heralding a new age of darkness. They spread out, flying towards the unsuspecting towns and cities of the human world. Our mission to save our family had failed. Now, our mission was to save the world from a war we had just started. And as the cold wind whipped across the barren hills, I knew that the greatest battle wouldn't be fought against the armies of the Nameless King. It would be fought right here, inside my own damned soul. This was not the end. It was the end of the beginning.